Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are joining this webinar from. I know we have got a global cohort of cyber leaders who have either gone through our cyber leadership program or they're part of our broader community. My name is Philemon Zongo and I'm the CEO of the Cyber Leadership Institute. Welcome to our webinar series. Today we focus on practical strategies that cyber leaders can implement to tighten cybersecurity within the supply chain. For anyone who is working in cybersecurity, I think it goes without saying that third-party risk or supply chain risk remains one of our biggest pain points. I know this firsthand as a virtual CISO working across multiple industry verticals and different client segments. Just this week, the identity management giant Okta suffered more than 2 billion loss in their market cap, resulting in a third-party related data breach where some of their administrative user accounts were compromised. But as this cyber risks continue to dominate boardrooms, most cyber leaders are unfortunately finding themselves woefully unprepared. A research that was conducted last year by the research giant Ponemon Institute indicated that 61% of organizations don't understand their third-party relationships. 6% were unsure, while 59% said they had experienced a significant data breach as a result of poorly secured supply chains. To unpack this very important matter, I am joined today by my good friend, Dane May, who is the CEO of MyCISO. Dane is an experienced cybersecurity professional with experience spanning over 16 years in cybersecurity industry. He has spent the last 10 years building and leading cybersecurity businesses. The first one being building a large cybersecurity practice comprising a range of consulting, advisory, assurance, and managed services. But most recently, which relates to what we are talking about today, Dane founded MyCISO Business, which is an office of the CISO platform that is designed to simplify cybersecurity management across strategy, supply chain, and cybersecurity cultural awareness. I would like to welcome Dane to the webinar. But before we delve into the intricacies of supply chain cyber risk management, I would like to invite you to take us through some of the pivotal moments in your 16-year cyber leadership journey and some of the pain points that inspired you to co-found MyCISO and solve this important matter that we are gathered today to explore. Welcome, Dane.
Thank you very much, Phil. Great to be here. So my story of getting into cybersecurity, I think like a lot of us here, would be quite fortuitous. I wasn't one of the graduates that are coming through the universities today who have studied cybersecurity, but rather a complete accident in that having moved from the UK 16, 17 years ago, I would call it the typical Australian dream. I found myself, unfortunately, without anywhere to live on my first day. Our accommodation had fallen through, and I'd emailed the only person that I knew in Australia to see if they could direct me towards someone that would have me. And at that house on my first day in Australia, I met the director of a little company known as Symantec. And for my sins, I worked there for 7 years in a subsidiary, for those of you that have been around a while, called Message Labs, and learned a lot about not only cybersecurity, but also scaling SaaS businesses. And, I like to call that role, my time in Message Labs as my MBA. It was, learning many different facets of business, marketing, finance, and of course, cybersecurity as well. It was there where I kind of saw an opportunity in the market. And those of you who've been in cybersecurity for more than 10 years would know, around 2014, there was the incidence of crypto locker that was really hit the scene in a big way, particularly in Australia, which was of course a type of ransomware. And that really shaped how we built my first business, InfoTrust, which was how do we solve and address this problem for our clients? And that was all we focused on, is how do we solve the most pertinent problems for our customers? And InfoTrust grew because of that, and the business is still growing and thriving today. But coincidentally and funnily enough, in 2015, as we were addressing ransomware, I had this little idea, which was, let's build a self-assessment tool. Let's build ransomware readiness assessment. And that actually spawned the idea not only to grow the InfoTrust business and supporting customers, but also that was where my CISO began. And it's been, it took us, many failed attempts and, many years of trial and error in terms of the software, in terms of the algorithms and so forth that go into the platform. But that was kind of the journey that got me to where we are today. It's definitely been a journey. There's lots of war stories along the way, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Okay, great. And congratulations for all your success. I had the privilege of meeting Dane when I was back at AMP, when I was working in technology risk and transitioning into cybersecurity, and I have witnessed this journey firsthand. And the reason I ask is because it aligns with our mission beyond going deep into supply chain risk management, which we are about to. We also have got this mission to inspire people to think beyond their self-imposed self-limitations. That's hence my curiosity into your journey. So let's get into it. To start off with, what are some of the emerging trends and challenges when it comes to supply chain cyber risk management? In short, what are some of the key issues around supply chain cybersecurity that keeps executives awake? And what do you believe will become increasingly important in the near future?
It's a great question. And I think the first thing that I don't think it's a case of should keep us awake. I think it does keep us awake. And that's our suppliers and the security of your information. And that's why it's become such a hot topic at the moment. We've witnessed recently numerous breaches, and you mentioned one a few moments ago in the media and the press. And it seems like a lot of the high-profile breaches are originating from a compromised credential or a backdoor left open by a supplier. So that in itself, I think, should keep us awake. The other thing to kind of keep in mind is what sensitive information does your supply chain have access to? I think as cybersecurity leaders, we focus on things that are within our control, the firewalls, the endpoints, the ability to respond to incidents in our environments. But the same way the goalpost shifted when data moved outside of your data centers to the cloud, the data's now gone outside of your data centers and outside of your cloud, and it's literally everywhere. And it can be with third parties and even fourth parties, and that's another dimension that we can talk about today. And lastly, the key piece around what should keep you awake and what you should expect is, does the security of your supply chain meet your expectations? If it were your environment, will it match up to what you would expect of yourself, your customers, or especially if you're regulated? And that's we're already seeing it in the financial sector in Australia, but there was a recent call publicly by an Australian bank, National Australia Bank, to insist that all suppliers and clouds, particularly cloud service providers, meet a certain minimum expectation in terms of the security of their environment. And that's kind of where I'm predicting. That's what I'm predicting to see. You might have seen government officials, again, particularly in Australia, talking about how secure is your supply chain. We saw the chairman of ASIC locally talk about how secure is your supply chain? So I expect in the near future there'll be some tighter regulations and probably legislation around that. Would be my predictions.
Okay, great start. A few years ago, I stumbled across a research by McKinsey, which said in the USA alone, an average financial services institution had an average of more than 20,000 suppliers. Just last week, when I was researching into this topic, a separate report by the Ponemon Institute said an average organization has about 5,800 third parties, and this number is expected to grow by about 15% during the next year. And given the significance of this risk and the sheer volume of third parties that organizations have to deal with, including some that have got remote access to the network, how should organizations approach third-party risk management and prioritize the suppliers, especially given the limitations around budget and resourcing constraints?
Yeah, that's a lot, right? And 5,000 would be pretty overwhelming for any organization to kind of wrap the arms around. So, I would say the old saying, if everything is important, nothing's important. So you need to prioritize and segment your suppliers. That's got to be first step, the very first step behind, how to tackle the sheer volume that we're seeing. And I guess the way to do that, what we recommend is taking a criticality approach, looking at a basic level, who's your low criticality vendors. It might be people that don't even have access to your offices, suppliers delivering stationary supplies, things like that, right the way through to management of your sensitive data, and who might be on the high criticality side. And there's actually 6 ways that we can recommend setting up a scoring algorithm, if you will. And this is available in an ultimate guide to security, supply chain security, which you can download after the call today. But the six ways we suggest scoring your suppliers is contract value, data volume, i.e., someone may be holding a medical record, for example, which is highly sensitive. But if it's 1 versus, 1 million passport numbers, the 1 million passport numbers wins because of the sheer volume of that fact. Obviously, data sensitivity was a key factor. Do they have physical access or system access? And lastly, the supplier itself, what is their mission criticality to your business? If they go down, if they get they're unable to operate as a business, then would that have a detrimental impact to your business? So those six tiers is way that we recommend scoring. And then, of course, those 5,000 suppliers, hopefully you haven't got that many in your businesses, but you can very quickly segment that. And you might find there's, in that example, you might have 100 or a few hundred at the top. And then, the long tail would be the low criticality suppliers, hopefully. So that's one way we use to segment suppliers and kind of make it a much more manageable project to kind of, then kind of where to focus first. Now, the other option is hire teams of people, just to manage this. Clearly, for most organizations, that's not a reality. So prioritization.
Okay, great. I love the simplicity with which you approach this because, as you know, the biggest challenge in cybersecurity is it can easily get complex. And we have got a strong appetite for complex models, but I like how you use these 6 categories to segment your suppliers according to risk. Moving on to a related topic, and I think this is a big issue. Recently, I came across an article which said the Australian Information Privacy Commissioner, privacy officer, had reprimanded a third party that had refused to share details around a data breach, saying they needed about 6 weeks to do an investigation before they reached out to the privacy commissioner. So the issue around, transparency and trust, which is the backbone of all strategic business relationship, I think continues to be a big issue, dating back to a few years ago when Verizon acquired Yahoo for almost $5 billion, only to discover later that there was a major data breach that had been swept under the carpet. How do you recommend cyber leaders to foster an open communication and a culture of sharing information with their business partners? How do we solve this?
This is a really interesting one because on the one hand, we're deep, strong advocates for conducting supply chain assessments of your third parties, but we've witnessed firsthand some pretty accidental data breaches in the process of doing this. So I'll explain what I'm talking about. And so I guess the first thing is we have to establish trust to make communication secure. So one thing we've seen more than once, and this is just as a vendor, we've had some of our customers send us the security assessment spreadsheets, still including information from other vendors. And if you realistically, a security assessment could be argued is the blueprint of where you're strong, where you're weak. So first of all, let's clear that. Let's avoid that from happening. So if you're being entrusted with sensitive data, obviously make sure you're securing that. I think that goes with any and all information. And on that note, spreadsheets. The spreadsheet assessment, they carry that risk, right? Human error, the file that gets printed out, it's saved on a machine somewhere. It has the potential to get lost. So I would say use mechanisms that are secure, that are within, that are not easily lost. And that will improve trust. I think, secondly, how do we raise the level of collaboration amongst organizations to share information with the right intent? And I think the key here is, we're mostly seeing organizations set benchmarks. Not everyone will meet those benchmarks overnight. So I think there is a role as a CISO to set reasonable but not unrealistic minimum thresholds. But then work collaboratively, because with third-party suppliers on a journey of uplift. Because it's easy to say, my backyard's nice and tidy, but your backyard is a right mess. But I think having sat kind of somewhat agnostically and seeing many businesses, every business that we speak to has parts of their security program that aren't really where they would like it to be. So I think a bit of patience and collaboration and not being a complete closed door on engaging with a business. So a bit of reasonableness is kind of where I'm coming from, and that I think that builds trust, and that builds I guess a greater likelihood that the supplier, the vendor, is going to share information honestly, and then see it as a partnership and not just a kind of an impermeable gate of entry into your, to supplying your business.
Okay, excellent. And I think a telling example came from Uber a few years ago when they lost about 16 million details relating to drivers and passengers. The CFO and the legal team connived to pay the ransom underhand and conceal the data breach, but always comes back to bite. So transparency, like you are underscoring, I think is the backbone of strategic business relationships. So moving on now, assuming we have done the baseline security review, which I see a lot of organizations do, which is very unfortunate because for them it's a touch and go. So they come in with a large spreadsheet, conduct a review, get some evidence, sample check, and then they leave and come back after 12, 15, 18 months or after a data breach. how do you foster or enable organizations to establish continuous monitoring? Because as we all appreciate here, cybersecurity is very fluid. Relying on an assessment that you've done 15 months ago surely doesn't give the board assurance.
That's right. Given the complexity, it's not a stone that many people want to turn over. It's kind of, once it's done, it's sort of people that we're speaking to are sort of happy to move on because of the complexity of the assessment process. Again, we love Excel, but between many versions of a document, back and forth dialogue over email, it's a complicated jungle of spreadsheets, email communications. So I think making that process easy and where possible automated. So having a systems and tools. And the other piece here, if you're continuously monitoring and there's a manual step involved, what's the statistic? I think 14 months is the average tenure for a cyber leader. And with that, what happens once the role changes hands? All of that IP or knowledge about how supply chain is being managed can quickly unravel. So particularly if there's messages in inbox, and so forth. So there's a couple of ways that you can automate and simplify this. The first is there are tools out there, and we'll talk about some in a moment, which automate the external assessment, kind of a continuous assurance check on, call it a couple of hundred data points on your third parties. Now, this isn't perfect. The external assessment tools give you a view, a lens on the security of an organization, but it doesn't give you the insights into the context or the effectiveness of their management practices. So, but it's a tool that you should have in your arsenal. The second piece is automating the ongoing assessment. So whether that's on an annual or biannual basis, however frequently is right for you, or perhaps anytime there's a major change with that supplier, automate that. So choose a tool which can automatically deliver an assessment and send reminders so that when the change occurs, they're being they're receiving the assessment, and then you're able to log into a single interface to manage that. But there's two ways of managing it. I wish I had a magic pill, a silver bullet to this, but as of today, it requires ongoing maintenance. The one thing I would say though is continuously monitoring your customers. It's important for you to contract with those third parties around essential factors relating to cybersecurity. One of those items may be if there's ever a major change in the way that they hold your information, for example, change of data centers or service providers, that they have to flag that to you so you can then reassess, make sure that the new environment meets your security expectations. So the contract with your third parties is a really key factor as well in that process.
Excellent. I took a couple of takeaways. Number one being automate, and remove the the key person dependency. And I smiled when you said an average tenure of a cyber leader is 14 months, because in my main VCs or gig, I have lasted 6 years. So I felt very good. I say that though, eventually I will move on, and if there is lots of information in my mailbox, that handover is painful and creates further risks than should be. So I love the ideas. I am going to combine my next two questions here because they are interrelated. A major question I get, and me as a VC, so again, when we report back cyber risk to the board of directors, is what framework have we based the assessment on? And this is very, very difficult because a lot of board members I deal with, they have heard of NIST in some organizations where they sit on the board, and they have heard of Essential 8, they've heard of CIS Top 20. What's your recommendation? And related to that as well, I would like you to touch on, what is a good benchmark? What does good look like? And the frequency of reassessment, which I said a lot of organizations I know do this once every year, which might not be enough, but again, it's balancing opportunity and risk. So those two questions bundled in together.
Yeah, no, definitely. So first of all, I would say, how do you measure yourself? So if you're, for example, an organization in the financial sector, you may have, you would have requirements to comply to financial regulations, CPS 234 in Australia. Or perhaps you're a business that is ISO 27001 certified. So depending on the criticality of that supplier, for the very highest criticality suppliers that has a similar access to the data in your environment as you do, then you'll want to measure them to the same benchmark. I think that's really going to ensure that they measure up to your standards. And then choosing another framework which is commensurate with the level of risk presented by that supplier. And again, the way that we do it at MyCISO is we have the full frameworks, if you like, ISO and NIST, and as I said, CPS 234, CIS. And then we have boiled down versions of some of those frameworks, 50 to 50 or so questions, and then a kind of a mini assessment, if you like, for the smaller vendors, ensuring that the basic critical controls are present, and that organization, despite being a low criticality, isn't presenting an unnecessarily high risk to your organization. So that's the first thing. So certainly low criticality, low complexity assessment, high criticality, higher complexity with like a full framework would be my recommendation. Now, in terms of what is the benchmark, now again, it comes back to if your benchmark for yourself is on a maturity scale of, say, 0 to 5, and your maturity benchmark is a 2 out of 5, and that might be the case. That's quite commonly an aspirational target for some businesses. Or perhaps you're a little bit more mature and you're going for a 4. It's really going to limit the suppliers you can work with if your target and expectations are at the level of a 4. But ultimately, it comes down to ensuring that is commensurate with your risk level. So a recommended maturity, generally based on part of what MyCISO does as its core business, is assessing security maturity across businesses. We commonly see high ones, so 1.8, 1.9 out of 5 is commonly what we see as a maturity score across businesses, into the low to mid 2s, with the top 10% in the high 3s or early 4s. That gives you a bit of a benchmark of where the reality of where businesses are at, and that might help you to kind of steer where you should set as a target maturity state. Generally, though, we kind of say 2s and above are a solid. That's a solid score. It means in our kind of capability maturity models, it means these businesses have strong controls in place in the key areas, and whilst they may not be programmatically managed, they are in place and periodically reviewed. So that's kind of how we look at it.
Excellent. Yeah, so I like the idea of humanizing cybersecurity, because like I said, when you're dealing with cyber, it's always complex. So I would like to invite you maybe to just spare a few minutes to share some success stories, because you are there in the trenches, you are working with customers every day, they've got all these pain points. Can you just share maybe 1 or 2 stories where you identified a customer pain point and how they use all these strategies to address the risk? Some relatable examples.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have many customers in the financial services sector. One is a credit union here in Australia. One of the challenges that they had was a difficulty for their customers to complete the assessments. They were previously using spreadsheets. The other difficulty they were having was what I just said earlier, is that back and forth dialogue over email, and then the context of the answers lost forever. So this particular customer, they were, I would say, on the smaller side of, organizations. They had about 65 suppliers that they wanted to assess. And after they were set up on the platform, they were able to move the vast majority of their suppliers through the assessment within a few weeks. So completing the company profile, completing the control assessment. Now they went for a mid-tier assessment maturity, so not a full ISO or NIST. But what was most pleasing was the feedback coming back from customers. So part of our assessment is we provide the supplier with a maturity assessment report with recommendations on how they can improve. And the feedback was, we've never seen this before. Normally, every assessment we do, it gets sent off and we never hear anything more. So part of the MyCISO kind of tooling value proposition was, we're ultimately, you want your suppliers to be more secure, right? But what the current model that exists, which I think is a bit broken, is you send a spreadsheet. If it's good enough, they never hear back, right? Or and that's quite unfulfilling. And there might be other areas that they can uplift. So what we've taken is intellectual property from our other capability, the security management program strategy module, are actually giving each supplier a little mini version of that platform as part of their engagement with you, absolutely free. So that was definitely one key win, and we saw emails from the suppliers that kind of talked to that. The other was, again, another sort of financial services business, 500 suppliers this time. And again, it was a very complicated myriad of different spreadsheets for different criticality levels. And yeah, just the management overhead of 500 suppliers was complex, and obviously required multiple people. So, setting up of dedicated mailboxes and things like that. Again, we were able to get rid of all of that, get rid of all of the spreadsheets and dashboard the results as they came in. That customers, again, able to now manage that from a platform. So those are some of our customer success stories. Again, few in the financial services space. But yeah, we're seeing organizations across all industries now sort of seeking to simplify it. It's a complicated way. We spoke the other day, Phil, about some of your engagements in the sort of vCISO space, it being quite complicated. The model kind of goes like this: you send the assessment, nothing happens. You follow up, nothing happens. You follow up again. Eventually, you get results back. Now, question: who's reading that spreadsheet? Is that the security leader's job to kind of analyze and score your third parties? Haven't you got enough to do in your own business? So again, that model, and then there's collaboration back and forth, as I said, over email, text message, phone calls, time-consuming activities. You become a mini cyber coach to your suppliers. Hey, you need to uplift there. Do you have risk management practices? Oh, what's risk management? Oh, let me explain this to you. Nobody's got time for that. So, the opportunity to simplify and streamline this with the right technology is plain to see. I've come to realize that where there's a heavy reliance on spreadsheets, as much as we love Excel, there's a business opportunity there. It happened with the general ledgers. CFOs love their spreadsheets. Sales teams and run their sales businesses through spreadsheets, and obviously we're now seeing that in the cyberspace as complexity's gone up. Introduction of spreadsheets to manage large volumes of data, and it's not sustainable.
Excellent, excellent. And I couldn't agree more. In my managing queries in spreadsheets in my physical space is my biggest pain. And but I like the idea that it's not just about conducting the security assessment. It's about improving the risk posture by making sure that the issues that are identified in the assessment are mitigated. And I see this all the time. You have got dozens of spreadsheets from different suppliers. You've got a third-party security that was done on Office 365 that identified 100 misconfiguration, with another third party come in and do an ISO audit, which is a checkbox. We've got 80 issues, and we've got very tiny cybersecurity teams with about 5 to 7 people. And no wonder that a lot of cybersecurity professionals complain that they are fatigued and overwhelmed. So simplifying and automating sounds to me like a logical idea. So just one last question in this segment before we move on. What about small businesses? I know you might have touched on it as you explained the whole process, but like I said, in my experience, a lot of cybersecurity teams are tiny. So you've got teams of about 5 to 10 people who have got a mandate to deliver cybersecurity transformation across many different domains, in addition to third-party security. What are your top recommendations for small businesses?
Yeah, sure. So, I think small in this context will be, probably sub 250 employees. We sort of say that are we talking that sort of. Yeah. So these small businesses, we meet them all the time, where they're big enough to have large enterprise clients that demand security of them, and by doing so they have to assess their supply chain as well. So what often the case, these teams are most stretched. You normally have a CIO, head of IT, and maybe one or two in security if you're lucky. Similar to the client I just spoke about, by the way, the credit union. And for these organizations, it's about efficiency. It's about not empires of technology, but actually tools and systems that are easy to use. Their focus has to be on driving the business forward. And actually, for any virtual CISOs on the call, that segment of the market, there's just a huge opportunity to go in as the virtual CISO and implement these types of projects. But then as a virtual CISO, again, you're not there all day, every day. So automation and simplicity has got to be top of mind. We do see at the larger end of town, the tier one banks and so forth will be using, tooling that, the ServiceNows, and, they're great. They have huge customizations and workflows, but far too complicated for these at the smaller end of town, or that don't have teams of people that can look after this. But just going back to your previous question, because you touched on something which is really relevant, and I hate to say it, but supply chain security, the work is dull. It's pretty dull, right? It requires, and it's kind of my baby, but it's also pretty dull, and I don't mind saying that. So to put a person on this exclusively, and that's all they do, and that runway is going to run out of tarmac pretty quickly. So again, making people's lives easier has to be the priority. It's hard enough for attracting people into your business, but then the mundane jobs, take it away, automate that, make a computer do that.
Okay, wow. No, definitely. And I know you're being diplomatic, but there's no two ways around this. It is so draining in my own language. And because I've done this many times, I'm an auditor by training. So I've been auditing a greater part of my professional life, and I feel the pain when you explain that. I will invite people to ask some questions via the group chat. So we are going to jump onto that towards the end of this conversation. But in the next session, this is my writer self. In writing, we've got this powerful saying which goes, show, don't tell, because it's much easier for you to show how you solve all these pain points than just to tell us. So, Dane, I know you've been articulating some of these strategies, but if you don't mind sparing a few minutes to just show us from your platform how you can use automation to address some of these pain points, obviously focusing on some of the key parts of that platform, because we only have maybe 5 to 7 minutes. If you can do that, I think that would be great because it brings the message to life.
Yeah, 100%. And first thing, we have the ultimate guide, which you can download here. Okay, so as Phil mentioned, we've built a platform, and this has been many years in the making. So 2017, we started to build the assess module, and I'll very briefly overview the assess module. We've really sassified what would traditionally require the consultant to go in, do an assessment on the business in terms of business context, goals, maturity, industry, and so forth. Recommend a framework to that organization. So that could be ISO 27001 or NIST. As I mentioned earlier, Essential A, APRA CPS 234, etc. And then go through that controls assessment before completing a risk assessment, and then completing your cybersecurity strategy. So I won't step through this today, but this was the core part of the module. We're many years in the making, and obviously it's now ready. The outputs from that are consultant grade reports, board reports around your cyber strategy. And that's important context for the suppliers module. So we've essentially taken the pedigree and intellectual property and capability that we built for the self-assess and the strategy development module into the supply chain module. So what you're seeing here is the questionnaire dashboard. So the first thing that you would do, let's say you've identified, 100 critical, or say 10 critical, 50 medium, and 100 low criticality. What you would then do is you would come in and actually set up, if you had any needs for custom questions. So you could say, do you have ISO certification, for example, or what information do you have relating to what sensitive information do you hold on behalf of us? And you can set different question sets for each of the high, medium, or low criticality. The next step is to choose a framework. So again, as I said earlier, you might choose a framework, an intermediate framework, and what we call our getting started framework for the 3 different criticality levels. Once that's complete, you load your suppliers into the portal, right? So you can do that via a spreadsheet or as they incrementally come on one at a time. And then all of a sudden, you'll see all of those suppliers appear in this view. Now, from this view, we have a section below the line, which is information about that supplier. So let's choose Diamond Hands, for example. So we'll make active that. And if I look in here, I can quickly see where they're up to with their assessment. They've completed the company profile, but they've got stuck on the supplier questions. But they have completed the assessment. So I can actually come in, look at where they're at. If they've attached any documents, maybe a penetration test certification, ISO cert, whatever, I can see those here. And I can also do things like set reminders for follow-ups directly in the portal. So let's go in and have a look. Let's have a look at their scores. Now, I can see they've completed this full NIST assessment. My size intermediate assessment here. And I can actually inspect the detail of their answers. So I can see for asset inventories, they've selected a maturity of 2. Now, I might not be happy with that score. The expectation may be, because they're, for example, holding our sensitive data, I might want to see a maturity of 3 for this. So I can actually send them a message directly in the portal to say, we'd like to see this control periodically reviewed and include informational assets, for example. So you click next. Now, what you can see here, I've selected that and it's put a different flag onto this account. So this is now marked as supplier. It means this control is actually back with the supplier. Now, if I was to log in with the supplier, it would actually show a red flag saying attention, which means I've got to review that, and it will flag on their dashboard that they have a question that they need to answer. So you can essentially go through, review the controls, or if you want to look at it at a more holistic level, you can actually just jump into the responses dashboard and you can see all of your suppliers, where they're at the moment, what the current maturity is, what step they're at. As you can see here, I've got a few that have completed all of the assessments, but I have finance dynamics that seem to be stuck at step 1. So again, I can click into that supplier and easily request them to complete that assessment again. And that's going to send them a notification to say that I have sent them a reminder to complete that. And I don't have to leave the dashboard to do that. Again, I can jump in, set reminders, assign tasks, to assign the actual supplier to somebody else in my team. And this might be triaged for follow-up or the like. So the other thing that you see here is any critical information. So this will automatically assign criticality levels based on the current maturity. Now, in this case, our benchmark that we've set is at 41%, which is the same as 2 out of 5. These are the ones, anyone that's 2 or above, I'm saying is a pass. Anyone that's a 1 to 2 is amber, and anyone that's beneath a 1 in this case, I've got major concerns about, and I want to be following up and having conversations with those suppliers. So all of this is available directly from this dashboard. Of course, there's filters and things like that as well, just to make your life easier. In terms of the reports, so what each of the suppliers will actually see, if I want to read a more detailed report on a paper document, I can actually come in here, generate the report from the supplier, then come in and actually read reports that look a little bit like this. And again, I won't jump into detail, but typical me, I've picked the largest report. This is the full strategy document, but if I come into, I'll look at the gap assessment, which gives us a little bit more brief detail. So in here, again, I can read very detailed information about where they're at, what the primary drivers were for their security program. These are questions that they've answered, what sensitive data that they're holding on our behalf, what the current maturity levels are, and again, maturity by domain, and also individual control maturity. So for example, I can see here that for business continuity management, they've got a current maturity of 1 against the target that we set of 3. And that's all in here, as well as available directly in the app. And I'm keeping to my 7 minutes there, Phil. I guess I'm happy to answer any questions, but yeah. That gives you a bit of an overview of the app.
No, I like it. So quite a brief, but I like the question that Ian is just posting the chat, where he's saying, this looks like suppliers responding to your request for an assessment, or is it that the supplier can complete their assessment against a profile and make available to all clients who might be interested in the same report? That's a brilliant question. How do you address that?
Yeah, so two parts to that. If they are a customer, then yes, they can do that. So if they're a customer and they want to publish their scores to third parties via a supplier view, then absolutely they can do that. And that basically drives down effort on completing those nasty spreadsheets yourself, right? If you're a supplier that's already completed an assessment and you get a second one from another business, guess what? There's an import button. So all you have to do is
great.
go to the assessment, say what it would look like. So if I just is you have received questionnaires as well. Now, I haven't received any, but if I happen to have an account as a paid, as it already through another vendor assessment, I can go into the answers and click import all the common questions that have been asked. There might be some that weren't in the assessment previously, but any that were asked will automatically get imported across. So that's, a way that over time, as more organizations use the tool, it drives simplification.
Okay,
Cool.
excellent. Okay, great. So thanks, Dan. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I love the simplicity again. And Dane, so thank you very much, I think, for the really insightful. For me, this, like I say, this rings a bell because this is what I do all the time in my VCSO space, third-party security, sometimes limited automation, so I can feel the pain. And when we look back, for me, we always say there are hot topics in cybersecurity. This to me is a perennially hot topic because looking back in 2013 when Target lost, I think about 40 million payment card details because they overlooked one supplier who was low risk, but they had remote access to their Active Directory for the purposes of submitting their invoices. And 7 out of their 10 corporate directors were fired. A lot of executives lost their jobs. They lost almost 300 million US dollars. And looking 10 years later, this problem seems deeper and even more pervasive. So thank you very much for sharing the insights. And what are your closing remarks?
My closing remarks would be, if you're not already tackling third-party risk, make sure it's on your initiatives list for 2023 and 24. And if it is, we would love to speak to you. So reach out. We're innovating in this space. We're improving the platform all the time. We'd love to have that conversation. So reach out and we'll speak to you soon.
Let's keep the conversation going. Thanks everyone for participating. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are, and we will see you again soon.
Thank you.